Hi everyone, Flex from ATACS here. A quick technical note before we start this Hades podcast. We experienced a number of technical difficulties with our normal recording software, which is usually fine, but you'll notice two things in this podcast that I want to mention up front. First, the first roughly hour and 25 minutes of this podcast needed a lot of editing. There were a lot of skips and cutouts and dead air and all that stuff, and we patched it up best we could, and you'll hear some quirks, but we think it's listenable enough, so sorry for the technical issues there. And then second, our recording just cut out at some point, so you will notice that it cut out mid-sentence. That's when we decided to cut to a break, so apologies again. It's a little abrupt, but when we come back from the break, everything worked like it normally does. So after the break, the back 20 minutes or so of the podcast is fine. And apologies for the poor quality in the first hour and 20 minutes or so. But we hope you enjoy listening to this deep dive on Hades. And with that, we'll get it started. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the ATACS podcast. It is December 6th, 2020, and we are here today to talk about Hades. I am your host today. I am Flex. Joining me is a panel of Supergiant experts. Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How's it?
It's going all right. I'm just looking for those hammers, you know?
Yeah, you really, need to get that bazooka gun.
Yep.
Also joining us is Ryan at New York City. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going good. I was wondering what qualifies one to be a Supergiant expert. I suppose having played the games to date helps in that regard.
Yeah, seems like a starting point.
We've all played Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and I guess now Hades.
At least some of us has. We'll touch on that in a second because I am curious about that because our final panelist here, Garrison from Antarctica. How's the weather down there, Garrison?
It's so cold, y'all. It's so cold. Give me that Asphodel heat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Crank up the heat down there.
Yeah. What heat are you rocking down in Antarctica? What heat level?
0. We don't do heat. Keep it easy.
But yes, we are here to talk about Hades, the latest game from Supergiant Games. And I kind of alluded to this, but yeah, most of us are, I would say, fans of their work. I know that Nate, Ryan, and myself have played all 4 of their games. Have you played any of their other games, Garrison?
I have not. Hades was my first experience with Supergiant. I'm familiar with their stuff, but this is the first one I've actually played.
Nice.
He's just had me telling him to play all of their games for years and years.
It's true. When I bought Bastion, he was like, if you don't like this game, I will pay you the cost of this game. And I have proceeded to not play it for the past
gotten around it.
And
6 years.
He even gave
Someday,
you the you will like this guaranteed policy, and you still didn't bite.
He's never done that before, and I let him down. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
it's fine.
I mean, if you wait for the right time on a sale, you can get that game for like $3 on Switch and or Steam. So, but yes, today we are here to talk about their latest game, Hades, which is a somewhat of a departure from their. In some ways, it's somewhat of a departure, and in other ways, it's kind of a culmination of everything they've been doing in all their games. I've heard them in interviews say they could not have done Hades without any one of their other games. They kind of take lessons from. They clearly take lessons from all their games and build upon it. So I think it's been really interesting to follow them as a studio, and maybe we'll get into this later. For my money, Hades is my favorite game of theirs, and I think it's pretty easy to see how they've built and improved on their games. Not that the other games aren't also great. But what makes Hades different is it is a roguelike, or roguelite, if you want to call it, however you want to define that. But you go on, at the start of your run, you pick a weapon, you go on a run, you might die along the way, or you might win, and regardless, you go back to the start of the run and you do it again. And I should say up front, if it wasn't clear, this podcast is going to contain spoilers of all sorts. So this is your one warning up front that, be it gameplay stuff, story stuff, everything's on the table. We're having a deep dive discussion. So fairly lengthy early access. And Nate actually started first, but Nate had early access. So I'll talk about that some, because you jumped in it the first. So you got to experience it earlier than any of us, what it was like.
It was really cool, but I also would say that I generally don't do early access games. I'll do the thing Ryan said a lot, where I'll buy a game in early access to remind myself that I want to play it when it fully comes out, and then come back around to it when it fully launches. So I picked this up pretty shortly after it first launched, which was right at the end of 2018, I'm pretty sure, and booted it up at the start of that next year, a month or two into its early access, and played around with it some, and kind of imagined that I would just check it out for a little bit and then put it aside and come back to it when it hit 1.0, and then proceeded to play it off and on for the year and a half or whatever the amount of time that it was in early access. I would basically come back to it every major update, which they did. They started off doing major updates, I want to say every month. And then they eventually slowed that pace down a little bit and spread them out more.
I think when I got in, they were doing it about every other month, every 60 days roughly.
Yeah, I think it started as every 30 days, and then they slowed it down to every 60 days. Because they said that the pace of every 30 days doing a major update was too much for their team.
That's pretty hardcore. I mean, it wasn't a super. If like you said, it was late 2018. They started the early access period.
Yeah.
It sounds like it wasn't a super long.
No.
Maybe more like a early beta almost in a way.
Yeah. So the game was pretty comparable to the final product when it launched in early access. It was just missing a lot of the breadth of the content available. So there's in the release version of the game, there's 4 areas, each with their own art style and unique enemies and the boss. And when it first launched in early access, only the first 2 areas were included. That was probably roughly if you think about the scope of the end game, it was probably roughly about 50% content there. But all the core systems were mostly in place. You had your weapons, and you're building loadouts by meeting gods along the run, and there were just not as many gods and not as many weapons to choose from at the start, and less variation along each run, and only those first 2 areas. But yeah, they just kind of every month or two put in either some new type of system, or new god you can meet, or new set of NPCs that had a side quest that went along with them. Things like that, just kind of trickling in every month or two. And then they would sometimes have their really big updates, which was whole new areas.
I think what was really cool, what I really enjoyed about the early access period, and I jumped in after it had been in early access for almost a year. And when I jumped in, all 4 areas were there. So all the way up through beating Hades was in there. I think every weapon but the fists was in there. Most of the gods were in there. I think everyone but Demeter was in there. Demeter, however it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Demeter, I think.
What about the dialogue and the the voice acting? Were those in there from the start, or were they kind of later inclusions?
They've definitely added a ton of dialogue and side quests and like levels of the I don't know what the game actually calls them, the hearts you get from giving characters the nectar.
Mhm.
They added more levels of that and more dialogue and side quests that goes along with that. So they added tons of stuff dialogue wise. One of the big things that still weirds me out when I play the game, because I played so much of it in early access, is a lot of the characters didn't have final art. So they were like, all the characters that didn't have final art were just like very generic looking person in robes with their face hidden by shadow. So like Nyx and a handful of other characters, even in the House of Hades. Charon was that way.
He was one of the last ones, I think, to get his final art.
He was. So that is one of the funny things to me, that like every time a new update came in that added in like Nyx's art, I was like, who is this person? I'm used to the like slightly gray looking robed person being Nyx.
I'm just picturing Theseus being
it wasn't never bosses, but
yeah, it was usually characters just like that stand around in the house.
Yeah,
and
just
stuff.
NPCs for dialogue, basically.
But I think to Garrison's question, I think one of the things they kept adding that was hard to notice they added is they kept adding more. Like there was always dialogue there. Like you could always talk to Achilles in the house from the start, and he, he would have things to say. But I think they kept adding every update more dialogue and extending their stories longer. So like, I mean, in the final game, you go forever until you hear repeated dialogue. And I think that's just because they kept adding and adding and adding dialogue. I feel like every time I'd look at the patch notes for the major updates, it'd be like, yeah, we added like 1 billion lines of dialogue.
Yeah, I feel like that's such an important part of the game. So I was curious, like, if it had been there from the start, or if it was kind of something they had put in later on. So that's pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, I think it started with a decent amount of dialogue, and then they just kept adding to it. So.
Yeah, they have said that this game is by far, like by orders of magnitude, not even close, the most dialogue and voice recording they've had in any of their games. Like sometimes I feel like that was the bulk of the work in the game as a whole, was just adding in dialogue and story stuff. Like this game has a lot of it.
And there were some instances of things that were only in early access, dialogue wise, that aren't, as far as I know, in the main game, because there were cases like when the game first launched, it only had the first 2 areas, Tartarus and Asphodel. So when you beat the Hydra in Asphodel and walk through that gate, they didn't have any more game. So it would just like fade to black and you'd hear the narrator say like, and let's just assume that Zagreus met some unfortunate fate, and he's like, wait, what? And then he dies.
They kind of do. So when I started playing, they had, so the thing you get now when you beat Hades, once you've beaten credits, and they have the little scene where it's like, Zagreus like slipped on a puddle and broke his neck, or whatever. Like they have some really cheeky way that he died. That's what was in there when I started playing. The one thing that still throws me off to this day is, because I played it enough in early access that like I do that, and then you'd be rising out of the river back at the house, and then it would have like in early access, it'd have this pop up and be like, "Thank you for playing early access. The game's not quite done yet, but keep playing, and we'll have more stuff later." But like that little pop up had like a sound effect to it, and like my brain is still trained to expect that sound effect after I complete a run, and I don't get it.
It's very funny.
Kind of the other 2 things I wanted to mention about the early access period, unless it has anything else as well, is I have not done a lot of access either, but I think they did a really good job with this one. And part of it is 2 things kind of stick out. One, I think the way they signaled the major updates was really well done, because they let you know when new stuff was coming. They generally would kind of tease like what was coming, kind of give you an idea. When it came, they would give you very detailed patch notes, which I feel like I got really into reading patch notes, and I feel like this is the first time I've done that since like StarCraft 2 or something. But that was always fun, and it was always meaningful stuff. Like the major updates were pretty major. They had minor updates in between that would like fix bugs and other things, but like the major updates had major stuff, and that was fun to see. I think the other thing that stands out to me is when I started playing, at least, and it sounds like this was probably true when Nate started as well, but when I started playing, like, the fundamentals were there. Like, the game felt the same. Like, the core loop felt pretty much the same. So, like, the final product really, to me, like, as someone who started playing after all 4 zones and Hades were in there, like, final product's not really all that much different. Like, there's like there's definitely more stuff. They added the fist, they added Demeter, they added stuff, they added more, the story, the true ending, all that stuff. But like, the core loop of the game is pretty much the same, which I think is pretty impressive that they locked in on the core so quickly and really just used the early access to really refine it to a T. And I think that shows in the final product. Like, I think it's just super polished.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think even more so than the fact that they had the kind of core game there from the start, early access both added a huge amount of variety of things you can encounter in the game, and just like depth to delve into in all the systems and side quests, but also mechanically made the game just more and more and more balanced feeling every time. Like, they patched so many just boons and systems and the way they work, and different buffs and debuffs throughout the game, based on community feedback, so that all that stuff is just it feels so good, no matter what kind of build you're running. Where, I mean, it felt good from the start, but I definitely remember early on in early access, I would get those like incredibly blessed runs where I was just unstoppable, or incredibly busted runs where I couldn't do anything. Things you expect in a roguelike. And I personally am glad that they sanded that down a little bit throughout the early access period.
Yeah, and we can start talking about the full game now, but I want to. This is a good transition. I've generally not been a huge fan of roguelikes. Like, there have definitely been some I liked, and some run-based games I've really liked. But I do think Hades, in talking about the final product now, does a really good job at, in my opinion, making every run and giving you the tools to make every run feel like you get cool stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like in a lot of times in roguelikes, I'll be like, oh, I just kind of got crappy items. Like, it's just kind of a crappy run. This doesn't feel that great. But I feel like Hades, and I think it's a lot of little things, and we don't have to, I feel like I could give the 30-minute spiel of like the smart things they do, but I'm not going to do that. But like, I think between the way before you choose a room to go in, you can see the icons above the doors that kind of let you pick which reward you want. When you actually choose a reward, you get to pick from 3 different options within the reward. Later game, you get some mirror upgrades that let you kind of re-roll rewards. You get some keepsakes that let you kind of like prioritize certain gods' boons. Like, you get some ways to kind of nudge things in the direction you want. But even if you don't do any of that nudging, like, I think just being able to like kind of see what's coming in the room ahead and being able to choose those options. And then most importantly, kind of what Nate was alluding to, is I think they've balanced a lot of those options. So like, it's not like I'm going to go get something absolutely terrible. Like, you might get something that's kind of useless for a build that you've started building, but like, I think they've done a good job at just making a lot of the rewards feel good. Like, I think a lot of roguelikes and games in general, I guess, have like both positive and negative rewards. I think Hades just makes everything cool. They're just like, no, everything you can get is cool. So like, you're going to get more powerful. Some things are going to synergize well and have like, sync up better for a certain build, but like, everything you get's cool. And like, I think that makes, for me at least, going through a run-based game more fun. Is it's like, I'm always going to get cool stuff, and I'm going to feel stronger as I go. And like, it has a really positive feeling to me. And I guess for the rest of you, like, thinking about like Hades overall, the roguelike run-based nature of it, like, did it work for you? Like, did you kind of like the feel of getting boons and progressing on a run and all that kind of stuff, like kind of its core loop? I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
It's actually, and I think we'll probably be zooming in to talk about like some of the different elements, like the boons and the weapon upgrades and stuff. But one of the things that you were saying earlier, Flex, was you were talking about Supergiant's previous games. And when I finished Hades and was just kind of like, well, finished, I think, I've kind of played, barring additional content, I've kind of hit a stopping point for what I planned on playing. And I was reflecting a little bit and was kind of thinking, like, one thought that came to my mind about Hades is it felt a lot, in some ways, it felt like you took Bastion and you made it a roguelike. That's kind of what, and you mentioned there are other games, which I can definitely see how, like, Transistor sort of had like the systems and synergies, like I think the swappable skills or whatever, and Pyre obviously had a lot of good character writing. But just kind of like thinking about Hades as sort of like Bastion as a roguelike. I mean, when I heard Supergiant was doing a roguelike, I was already like pretty optimistic because they Supergiant in general has really fun gameplay and they tend to polish their games really well. But as for me, Flex, you said you kind of weren't a roguelike guy. I kind of am. And part of the reason for that is, if you think about a game like Bastion, for me, like, I mean, I really liked Bastion, and it's cool in like its own ways. Like, but one thing I do remember from Bastion is, if I remember correctly, you had several different weapons, and you could upgrade them and maybe like equip a couple at a time or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for a game like that, a lot of times, once like that sort of fixed game, like there's no real incentive to mix up what works. So, as you get the weapons, as you upgrade them, you might flip around. It's like, oh, I've got a pair of gloves now, or oh, I've got this blunderbuss thing that's kind of neat. But then, you use it a couple times, and you're like, well, the sword just works better, like, or I'm just used to it.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, I think, with more fixed progression games, you kind of fall onto whatever strategy works or feels best for you. Whereas roguelikes and loot games can do this as well, depending on how the structure and progression goes. But one of the things I really like about roguelikes is that they always kind of throw you into new situations. And so, if you think about a game like Bastion, except it's kind of constantly forcing you or encouraging you or whatever to like switch what you're doing and not always stick with like just using the sword and the hammer because that's what you started with and it's the most balanced or whatever. So that's one thing I really like about Hades is just it takes some of that polished gameplay of the older games and sort of like and of course, it has all the different combinations and interactions and synergies that I think we'll probably be geeking out about in a couple minutes. But yeah, I do really like, just that the way that Supergiant has kind of taken some of what they already did really well and then put it into a game. And like you said, there's definitely an element of polish to it. Like they had to make. I'm sure it's not easy in any way to get the enemies and the skills and weapons to all balance out in a way where you can definitely have good runs and bad runs, but in general, like you don't usually feel like you're going to fall into a cliff most runs. It happens once in a blue moon, especially if you're trying to shoot for something specific and it doesn't work out. But generally speaking, yeah, the stuff is just good enough that it will work.
Yeah, I think to that point, one thing I think about with roguelikes is like, do I think if I play well, is every run beatable? And I feel like in Hades it is. Like like I have had a couple runs, the once in a blue moon, maybe what Ryan's referring to, where like I start trying to go for a build that's maybe a little ambitious, and then I don't quite get some of the pieces I need, so it can kind of fall on its face a little bit. But But I do start out in general, like thinking like, all right, if I play well, like, you know, it's possible some things could go against me, but you know, every run's beatable. Another thing you allude to, Ryan, is like he started talking about like the balance work they would have to do. And it is wild if you start thinking about like between all the different weapons, the keepsakes, the different boons, like all the other different upgrades, like the palm upgrades you can get and the chaos and hammer upgrade. Like there's so much stuff that goes into every run. Like the balancing act there must be wild. But I think they did pretty well with it.
Yeah, and it might be worth, you know, a couple things I did want to touch on, you know, while we're just talking about the roguelike and roguelite nature of Hades, is a couple of the things that it does that are a bit unique. So for me, I tend to prefer roguelikes over roguelites, sort of more traditional roguelikes which don't have progression. And for me, part of that reason is the roguelites that I can think of, while I have enjoyed them, I tend to have this feeling that they sort of have these built-in grind walls. So games like Rogue Legacy, I think, was sort of a big offender for me, but also Everspace, and maybe to a lesser extent a game like Dead Cells, where you kind of like your first few runs, it really doesn't matter how well you play or how much you learn the game, because you just, you have no health potions and you have 10% of the health or defense or attack stat that you're going to end the game with. And until you do 50 runs to build up experience or gold or whatever you need to unlock stuff, like that can be a bit grindy, even if I sort of enjoy the loop, and it creates this sort of feeling of an artificial barrier for me personally. Mm-hmm. But a couple of the things I think that Supergiant did well, and Hades for me wasn't completely immune to that. I do remember it
definitely has permanent progression.
Yeah, I definitely remember losing a run to Hades, getting him down to getting to Hades, having him at 30% health, dying, and then unlocking 10% more damage and being oh, it's a roguelite. Great. But at the same time, a couple of the things that I think Hades does really well in its roguelite structure, so in terms of the difficulty, it rolls out complexity. In your first few runs, it starts introducing new things, and then as you unlock, especially things like the contractor upgrades, those are sort of adding mechanical complexity in addition to player progression. But it also puts a lot of it puts some of the difficulty control in the player's hands with things like the packs and the heat, and that's pretty unique actually. I don't think a lot of roguelites have done that, and sort of like the way that your first few runs, there is sort of this artificial barrier, but you're also learning the game at the same time. And it, it's also not a huge long stretch. I feel like, maybe within your first 5 to 10 runs, you can start maybe seeing some close runs or some wins. But
yeah, to that point, I actually did an experiment a couple of weeks ago as I started a fresh file from scratch, reset all the progression, everything. And just with the knowledge and practice I've gotten on my main file, I almost beat the game on my third run. Really all I had unlocked was in the mirror, I had the second dash, the double dash, and I had one Death Defiance. And with just those, I got just Hades' second form. And got him half health, and it's with a little bit better play or a little bit better build, or maybe one extra Death Defiance, which you could get in probably a couple runs. It's pretty much there. So and granted, that's coming after I have 100 plus hours of play under my belt, but I think if I understand the point you're trying to make, Ryan, is like the progression gets you to where it's beatable, before too many runs.
Yeah, definitely. There's not a huge grind wall. And then on the other end, once you do hit that point, the game kind of gives you the pats, which is where you can kind of turn up the difficulty, and it encourages you to kind of like inch up the difficulty. Unless you want the skelly statues, and then it just encourages you to just go all out.
Yeah.
But
Skelly's hardcore, man.
The other thing I think it does really well, and I'll just, we can dive into this. I'll shut up for a minute, but is the story progression. The way it kind of weaves that. I think that's a really good mechanic. If you're going to have like a roguelite sort of progression system, it's kind of neat that they kind of like roll out character dialogue and story. And although I think other games have done this, and I think, even some roguelikes in an unappreciated way tend to have pretty like subtle environmental storytelling that you can pick up across, they tend to have a little bit of lore and world building. But I think in terms of like a roguelite where you're kind of giving the player rewards, like story is something that Supergiant has done a lot with in Hades, and I think that's really smart for progression too, because it sort of always gives you something to look forward to, whether you're succeeding or quote unquote failing.
Yeah, the Hades has a lot of permanent progression, but I agree with everything you've been saying, Ryan. That I think they do it in a positive way, and I was just having flashbacks to when I first started playing, and like I was always super excited to start a new run or when I finished a run successfully or failed, getting back to the House of Hades and like, oh, what's going to happen, what kind of story, what kind of progression is there? And this game feeling like it was always building up both mechanically and narratively. Like, what did it like? How was that onboarding ramp for you? Like going through unlocking stuff and that progression, like did it work for you?
Yeah, so I guess a bit of background for me. I would probably call myself a bit of an occasional gamer these days. So I played video games like all growing up, all through college, but over the last years of my life, I just haven't been playing it. Most of what have been playing stuff like Nintendo games mostly, and I certainly still dabble in other stuff, but like I tend to prefer kind of experiences. I can just kind of jump in, not too complex, don't have to really think about too much, but can just have a lot of fun. It's kind of my background heading into this game. But I did kind of get it because A, I'm interested in Greek mythology. B, the internet was like blowing up about it, and I was kind of curious. And like it does have that kind of design philosophy. Like it is, you play a very quick, like 30, 40 minutes tops on a run and you're done. So it's still designed to be kind of taken in bite-sized chunks. So it does still have that appeal to me. So I would say that like on that level, like I think it does a very good job of like introduce to the game. Like you start out just the sword, right? Like you start out with just one weapon, don't have many options. And then slowly you get weapons, you get more mirror unlock or keepsakes, it gradually builds that complexity. So I think that works out very well. And I think the game does do a good job of always providing you with the tools that you run, even if you don't really know it. Even now, having, completed the game enough to reach the credit, I still don't have a great sense of what things all together. But even on the run that I would say was probably like my worst successful run, where I had like, I can't remember the exact setup, but it was like, I was playing the bow with 5 different boons from 5 different gods. And I was like, not like it's compatible at all with each other, able to pull it off. So I think the game does a good job of like, even if you don't have the time or patience to like it still doesn't prevent you from succeeding, and it doesn't prevent you from having a lot of fun, which I think is a really valuable thing.
Yeah, and I think they do a lot of stuff around difficult in this game as well. Like I think on normal, like beat aim on the normal difficulty with no heat levels is a good but doable challenge. I think if you're someone who doesn't play a lot of games, they give you the God mode to make it a little easier. And if you do want a challenge, they give you all the packs, the heat levels, they give you hell mode, like they give you ways to ramp it up. And I think at the higher heats or whatever is where you probably do need to focus on like build synergy and all that fancy stuff. But I think at like the base level, like I think a really positive thing about this game is you can kind of grab some stuff you like and have a good time, and like the game is still beatable. Like you still have to play well, but you're not doomed just because you didn't get the perfect combo or whatever on your build. So speaking of builds, let's nerd out. Let's dig into weapons, boons, keepsakes. What kind of stuff we liked, didn't like, enjoyed using. Nate, you've been quiet for a while, so I want to pose you a very important question. Mm-hmm. What is the best weapon, and why is it the spear?
Well, if you phrase it as what is the best weapon, I think it's all of them. I really honestly think all the weapons are really strong and unique and fun to use. So even if I made a ranking of favorite weapon to least favorite weapon, I still like my least favorite option pretty well.
We were talking about is like they did a good job balancing all this stuff.
Yeah, I think.
Although I don't know, I having done the 32 heat runs, like I mean, it would be tough. Even some of my favorite weapons, it would be tough to do those with. But just imagining trying to do some of the higher difficulty stuff with the shield, makes me very sad.
I think maybe the shield is our group consensus, like not the best weapon or our favorite.
Yeah, what on the shield, Garrison?
What was that question?
Where do you stand on the shield? Do you like the shield?
I am not a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that might be our consensus group least favorite weapon.
I have had some runs where I've had some fun with it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I won't contest that. But
yeah, I definitely had fun with all the weapons. The shield to me is like, for some reason, every time I play with it, it just feels really rambunctious. I don't know why, but it feels like I'm just like flinging the shield around, like running in stuff's face, bashing it into a wall. Like it feels like it's just all over the place. It feels a little more chaotic, which I guess it is the chaos shield, but but I feel less in control, and to me it feels just less reliable in that way. But I could see there being someone out there who they're like, yeah, this is my jam, this is my play style, because like my favorite weapon is the spear, and I don't think that's because the spear is a better weapon than any other weapon. I think that's just because it suits me and like my mentality, my play style. So there's probably someone like that out there for the shield.
The times I've had a lot of fun with the shield are when I remember that the bull rush move where you hold the attack button and hold up the shield to block, and then you can rush forward with it. And I do have a lot of fun when I use that well, like blocking attacks and then or like dodge, like charging through the bullet hell areas of the game and using that to like close distances fast. That can be a lot of fun, but generally, shield's not my favorite. What were you going to say, Garrison?
And I have seen a lot of people who really like the shield because it's very good as a defensive weapon because you are blocking damage in front of you all the time. So like if you can position yourself, you can kind of take your time, line up a shot, and like be really successful that way. So I think it does a good job too of like different weapons suit different play styles very well, which is really neat, while still making all of them feel balanced, except the shield, which is totally the bottom.
Yeah, it's funny because it is basically the only way in that game to 100% negate any attack. Just hold up.
How does that
even
work? I don't think I ever had this happen with the shield. Is it literally if you're just standing and the shield's facing something, it blocks it, or do you have to like hold the bull rush charge where he holds it in front of him, or like do you have to do something, or is it just
if you're holding
it's the bull rush?
If you're holding X, he holds the shield in front of him, and as soon as you let go, you do the rush forward. You can hold it in place and spin 360 very quickly, so you could just sit there and block attacks as long as you want.
I never.
And when I remember to do that and like use it effectively and use the bull rush a lot to like close distances, it is fun and satisfying. But it's just like for some reason it's not the thing I'm thinking about when I'm playing the game, and I usually end up forgetting to do it. I think my favorite weapon that I've settled on recently since 1.0 is probably the fists.
Nice.
That's a good pick.
Magnetic cutters.
Magnetic cutter aspect on the fists. Just pull in enemies, turn it into a ranged weapon, but then when you get in close, you just keep spamming that basic attack combo and dodges until either you run out of health or they do.
I like to think that you hold the attack button to spam out attacks, and you don't have to keep mashing. Yeah. The other thing we haven't mentioned is like there are 6 weapons in the game, but every weapon also has 4 aspects, which can make them play pretty differently. And I think that's really cool. Like some of my favorite variety in the aspects is actually the gun, because you get, the basic aspect just gives you more ammo in your clip because you do have to reload with the gun. The best classical Greek weapon, the gun. But then like other aspects is like makes your first shot like a power shot after reloading, and another one like if you stand in your specials area where it lands, you get a power boost, and so like that incentivizes you getting into where your special lands. And then its final one is like a giant laser beam or something. Like it's just weird. And like I really appreciated just like the extra variety in the aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing. It's tough to describe, I guess, to anybody who's not familiar with this game structure, which I assume if you're listening to this, you probably have at least played Hades. But, one of the things that makes all these options interesting is just the way that they kind of synergize, or, in some cases, some cases even kind of, I guess, quote unquote, non-bow, or kind of I don't know, what would you say, antagonize each other? Like, that's pretty rare in Hades, though. I think we talked about they don't give you a ton of options. The gun aspect you were mentioning, Flex, there's a gun power up that makes your bomb hurt you. So that's like one of the few examples where you could pick something that encourages you to stand in your own bomb, and then you could pick something else that damages you for standing in your own bomb. But that's one of the rare examples of the sort of anti-synergies you might find. But yeah, by and large, there are a ton of different ways to put together, and they tend to have synergies. And one thing that Flex was alluding to, like with the different weapon aspects, each weapon has 4 aspects, and in a lot of cases, it depends on the weapon, but in a lot of cases, it feels like your starting aspect is your most balanced aspect. Whereas like your second and third aspects usually will steer you like towards using your regular, which I guess your X attack or your standard attack. And then the other aspect will power up what they call the special. So you have 2 attacks. You have your regular attack and you have your special attack. And a lot of times one weapon aspect will kind of steer you more towards using the basic attack, and the other aspect will steer you more towards using like the special attack or some other play style. Like I think one of the shield aspects, whenever you block an attack, it powers up your charge attack. So it encourages you to run around and try and block as much as possible to get that bonus damage. So yeah, did you want to give a list, Nate, or are you good just kind of like...
I don't know that I have a full ranking ready, but
That's cool.
I would say that the gloves were probably my favorite, and shield is probably my least favorite. I do like the bow a lot as well.
Like, I don't want to do like full rankings, but I would like to hear from everyone. What's your favorite weapon with the aspect, and what is it about that you like? So what is it you like about the magnetic cutter gloves?
So in regular fights, in regular mobs, the magnet cutter just lets you pull enemies one at a time, and then you can punch the crap out of them. And it has a good stun on it too, so you can basically just nuke any one enemy you want from far away, which, it being such a close range weapon, helps a lot. And then even in boss fights, I find it helpful for any time I can get either just straight up a ton of bonus damage on the special, which is something you can definitely do, or you can get debuffs or status effects applied to your special, and then you could just run around like using that long range magnet cutter to tag the enemy with whatever status effects you want. Throw doom on them, or cold or chill to slow them down, or just little things like that are still helpful. It is most useful in probably regular mobs because you can pull an enemy and stun them, which is always satisfying. But I still find it useful with the fists in particular to just be able to tag bosses from a safer distance before closing in on them to punch a whole bunch.
It's kind of giving a ranged angle to a otherwise melee weapon.
Yeah, just give it a little more flexibility. And then just the fists in general, I just really like the attack string and dash attack basic setup where I just want to get in close, do a ton of damage, and just watch for enemy tells and enemy patterns that I've learned from playing this game way too much to just dodge through them, basically. So I'm just in there mixing it up as much as I can.
Yeah. Ryan, I think I know your answer, but what is your favorite, your combo, and what do you like about it?
So as a side note, I think the first time I tried a 32 heat run, it was actually using the gloves, and I somehow made it to Hades, which still boggles my mind a little bit because the gloves are a very risky weapon. So I feel like I fudged some things there. For me, it's really close, probably between the gun or the gloves. I would probably lean a bit more towards the gun. I liked the aspect of Eris, which you just hit yourself with the bomb and you get like a pretty substantial, like 75% damage bonus.
Fun fact, thus far, that is the speedrunner's weapon and aspect of choice, I think, for the damage bonus.
Yeah, the damage bonus is really high, and I find that the gun is a little bit safer and more consistent than the gloves, even though I really enjoyed the gloves. I like the aspect of Zagreus with the gloves just because the dodge chance gives you a little more buffer. But yeah, the gun it's a little safer and more consistent. And I also liked leaning into the special attack play. I think the special attack upgrades on the gun are just a ton of fun. Triple bomb, cluster bomb, like rocket bomb, like just some of my favorite builds with the gun were just like, getting like maybe like a debuff or doom or something, some kind of debuff on the regular attack that I could just, because it does have a nice flow of shooting out your clip, and then while you're reloading, shooting whatever your bombs are. But my favorite runs with the gun were just totally powering up the bombs in some way and just like, getting myself buffed up with that damage buff and just like nuking everything with either rockets or bombs in some fashion. But I do want to shout out. I also thought, just for fun, I had a ton of fun in some of my later runs before I stopped playing with the aspect of Poseidon on the sword, which is a cast-focused aspect, and that kind of, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but that kind of shows you some of the depth and the balance of the game where casting and calling they feel almost like supplemental mechanics, but then, if you do like aspect of Poseidon on the sword, you can try to build around them and do some fun things with that.
Yeah. So what does that one do specifically? I don't know that I ever used that one.
The aspect of Poseidon on the sword does two things. Its passive buff increases your cast damage by up to plus 50%, and it makes it so that when you use the sword special, the little Nova attack, it will dislodge any bloodstones that are lodged in an enemy.
It's really, really fun. especially if you combine that with some of Artemis's stuff.
Yeah. I had a run where I had her exit wounds,
Yep.
like a really powerful version of that, and
The exit
aspect
wounds
of
that
Poseidon.
deals damage to enemies when your cast stone is dislodged from them, and then you use your Poseidon sword special to just immediately dislodge them. And you just
Yep.
and you get the rapid fire cast from Artemis and extra casts too, and stack that all together. You just pump them full of bloodstones and then knock them all out, and they take 1,000 damage.
Something like that. So anyway, yeah, Aspect of Eris gun was probably my go-to.
Yeah. What about you, Garrison? I know you haven't probably tried out as many of the aspects, but what have you enjoyed the most thus far?
I think my favorite weapon is probably the spear, but it's also one of the ones I seem to be the worst with, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
It was the last weapon I was able to beat the game with, and I don't know if it's just something about it. I just never quite am able to like do the bosses quite right with it, but I still have so much fun using it.
Yeah, I'm the same way actually.
I have the most. Yeah, like it's funny too because like again, like you can have fun with this game even when you're not winning, and I think that's part of the beauty of it. I definitely have my most wins and my cleanest wins with the gun. I think it's a pretty good gun for people or a pretty good weapon for people who are maybe trying to like learn the game because you have the range, you have a few different attack options, and I find that it stacks really well with a lot of different boons, so I think that's a lot of fun. I haven't dipped too much into aspects because I'm so afraid of wasting my Titan's blood on like bad aspects, which maybe I think is one critique of the game is that the grind can be a bit tough sometimes, and it's forgiving in a lot of ways, but I think there's no way to regain Titan's blood, and it can be hard to come by. So if you use it and decide you don't like the weapon aspect, you're kind of out of luck. But I do like the bows aspect of Chiron with the seeking arrows. Because again, it's just a good way to like, for someone again who's not super great at the game like me, like it's still a good way to like it's easy to kind of build around and just keep pressure on, especially bosses, just keep the pressure up.
Yeah, that is something I noticed because you're talking about the grind with the Titan's blood is, which I like all the aspects you mentioned, but there's not a great like getting Titan's blood is a slow burn and it takes a lot to upgrade the aspects. Like I've played probably 100 runs of this game and I haven't unlocked all the aspects. I might be exaggerating on the run count, but I've played a lot and have not unlocked them all. You can speed it up some. I powered through a little bit of like with the broker. You can give him ambrosia, I think, for a Titan's blood, but yeah, you can't get it back. And there's actually a limited number you can get by upping the heat level. So at some point, if that's not enough, which I would assume it would be, I don't know, but if that's not enough to unlock everything, you would have to trade ambrosia,
or buy it from Charon and the Temple of Styx.
Yes, true. For me, I both enjoy playing the spear and also I feel like all my best runs are also with the spear. Like I think it just works well with me, and maybe this is a little plain, but I really like the base aspect of Zagreus that just increase specials range and damage. Like it just makes the special better, which is I use the special more than I do the regular attack on the spear. So it's just a straight flat buff to it. But I like the spear because it has good melee option, but even its melee option has good range to it. So like unlike the fist or the shield or even the sword, like it has more range. Its melee has more range than those weapons' melee. So I like being able to poke things from a distance. And then of course the special, which throws, has really good distance, especially with aspect of Zagreus. And I really like being able to throw it through shield guys and then pull it back and damage them on the way back. and I get around Theseus being annoying, and I can just be like, I don't block it all day. I'm just gonna pull it through your back, and this is great.
Yeah, those guys with shields suck.
Yeah, the shield guys in Elysium are they're among my least favorite enemies in the game. And when I have the spear, I'm just like, no, this is great. That's for me right now. Two other aspects I really like. I really like the homing arrows that Garrison mentioned on the bow. I've had a couple runs playing with that aspect where I just really stack special damage and just tag someone and then they just take tons of damage, and it's great. It has an almost like that's probably my favorite build to have against bosses, because it just piles on so much damage to a single target.
My funny story is that for my 10th win, I had the bow with the targeting, and I had like so many good boons. I was so pumped for the Hades fight, and you get to him and just lets you through, and I was like, oh man, I want to like beat you with this.
Yeah, I had one fight where I had just so much damage stacked on my special. I had I think I had a rare. What was the rarity of the purple? Is it just rare?
Epic.
I think that's epic.
So I had the epic Aphrodite boon, which is just a pretty good raw damage buff in addition to the status effect. And then I had 2 hammer upgrades that increased the special. Like one added more arrows, and I forget what the other one was, but they were things that made the special better. And then I had a chaos boon that was more special damage. I had Hermes boons that like increased special attack speed and stuff. And it was like, I just went into Hades, just tagged him, and just started spamming ammos, and it was the quickest Hades fight I've ever had in the game. Like, I feel like that aspect in particular, if you get the right stuff to stack special damage, you can really just chew through health. It's maybe not as great against swarms of little guys, but against bosses, single target bosses, it can be wild. The other aspect I had a lot of fun with, just real quick, is the gun aspect that is. Oh, I'm so bad with names.
Hestia, maybe?
Yes, Hestia. Yeah, the third one down, which is after you reload, that your first bullet is like a lot more damage. So with that aspect, I developed this play style of like shoot the powerful shot, dodge, and you can reload as you're dodging. So I'm like reloading and dodging simultaneously, and then fire my one shot and then reload and dodge. So I'm never using the full clip. I'm just firing the one shot. And it's like this weird sniper build. And like, if you stack damage on it, you're dealing like 500-600 damage per shot. So you're just popping enemies, just pop, reload. Pop,
yeah. I don't think I ever tried that.
I remember watching you. Yeah. I remember you watching you. You showed me a little bit of that. And it was such a new concept to me because I had never messed with that particular aspect.
Yeah, the couple of times I've tried that aspect, I've always been like, this damage buff doesn't seem that great. But I guess if you're really just only firing off that one power shot, then maybe it becomes worth it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. I don't know. I'm not going to make claims that it's like better than the other gun aspect, but like I've made it work. And I mean, my play style is a lot of dodging anyway, so it's like, since you can reload while you're dodging, it's like, okay, fire my shots and dodge and reload.
I have a feeling that all of our play styles involve a lot of dodging.
I don't see how you could play this game super successfully without dodging a lot. It kind of encourages you to do that.
Yeah. So let's expand a little bit here. What other kind of general stuff did you like? What kind of boons did y'all like using?
Yeah, I want to know what is the thing that when you see it as an option on a door, you're always going to pick that thing.
I mean, hammer tops.
Yeah, I mean hammers. You should probably just nix hammers because they're obviously the best. But in terms of like god boons, which god would you always pick?
Do we have to disqualify Hermes as the same as the hammer?
Guess so, because that would be my answer.
Hermes is sort of it does in most. I mean, Hermes, I guess, is a little bit down from the hammer, where if you're already pretty high on like synergies, like, sometimes like if I've got like, let's say 3 Zeus boons, and I really need like a static discharge because, that's one thing is I feel like some of the gods are way more dependent on actually getting their synergies. Zeus in particular being an offender in that category, but yeah, Hermes I might bypass if I really need to pick up a synergy from somebody, but yeah, I do feel like Hammer and then Hermes is kind of
Yeah.
a bit of a given.
Both Hammer and Hermes are like Hermes is unique as he's the only one of the gods boons that like he doesn't have an attack boon, he doesn't have a special boon, he doesn't have a cast boon. Like
No, you'll never have to give up anything you already picked to take a Hermes boon.
Yeah.
He just gives you good stuff.
yeah, he just has like general buffs that are going to help almost any build. But
I think he might have some. Like I remember 1 or 2 situations where if you pick some of his stuff, it kind of non-bows a little bit. Like maybe like the instant Bloodstone return. Like
Could be, yeah.
if you have like the Zeus boon that shoots lightning at your Bloodstones or whatever.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare that because you get 3 choices every time you pick something. It's pretty rare that.
Yeah. Hermes mostly gives you strict upgrades, and sometimes they can be very powerful synergies, like plus 30% special speed. If you're already on a special build, that's amazing. Or like he gives you extra dashes. He gives you like
dodge chance is always good.
Yeah,
dashes is so much fun if you get like +2 or +3 and you're just dashing forever.
I feel like his +3 dashes might be one of the most busted boons in the game.
Yeah, it's not
because your dashes give you such generous iframes, and when you get +2 or +3, you can basically by the time, assuming you have the mirror upgrade, which gives you an extra dash, that puts you up to 4 or 5 dashes, and by the time you're finishing your 4th dash, I think usually your first dash is probably cooled down, so you can literally like there's a very short pause between chaining like your 4th or 5th dash and then just starting again.
Yeah. But I think to answer the real question you're asking, Nate, for me, Artemis #1, and probably for me, Aphrodite #2.
Oh.
That one depends a little bit on weapon and what I already have. Like Artemis, I'll pretty much am always on board with. The next tier is often Aphrodite, and the reason is I think for me in my play style, weak I find to be a pretty good status effect, and I think Aphrodite's damage buffs are as good or better than most of the other gods. So for straight damage, she's a pretty good one. Poseidon is kind of my other one in that role, is I like a lot of his stuff. And then Athena I will grab just for the dash, and that's it.
You always pick Athena once just to hope you get that dash.
That's exactly.
It's so true.
It's really funny too.
Artemis is my main, and then Aphrodite and Poseidon are kind of my, other than the Athena dash, Aphrodite and Poseidon are kind of my other top picks.
I think we're sort of on the same page on a lot of things, but I guess this shows you sort of the variety that Hades supports because, the spear is Flex's favorite weapon, and I think he beat one of his 32 heat runs with it. It's actually my second least favorite weapon. Like I dislike the shield the most, and then I dislike the spear. And Aphrodite was probably my second least favorite god. Definitely towards the bottom. I mean, it gets pretty fuzzy outside of maybe like your favorites and your least favorites, but yeah, it is funny that you like the spear and Aphrodite because those are usually not strong picks for me.
Yeah, I don't like everything with Aphrodite. I don't really like her cast or call that much, and maybe not even her dash, but I really like just the attack and special, and I like a lot of her like passive boons. She has straight up damage reduction boons. She has boons that give you more health on health pickup. So sometimes I've gotten like an epic version of that early in a run. So then every centaur heart you pick up gives you 36 health instead of 25. So I'll just end up with a ton of health. So like some of her passives and stuff I like as well, but I mean I could definitely see favoring some of the other gods as well because they all have good stuff. What about you, Garrison? What kind of effects did you like a lot?
I tend to go for Dionysus boons. I'm not even sure Dionysus is all that great. Like I like Hangover a lot. The damage isn't that significant, but it's just kind of like, again, like my first win was built with Dionysus boons, and that's just kind of been like, oh, well, Dionysus, well, that's always been helpful for me. So just kind of gravitate toward that. I do like Poseidon a lot. His dash is really fun. Although I'm slowly learning the game and learning the boons, realizing, okay, you don't always want the Poseidon dash because some weapons don't really work well when you're knocking things away. But it is still kind of fun just dashing around, knocking things away.
I love
Dionysus is still kind of my bro in this game.
Yeah, I really like Poseidon's dash. I never really I've never really come around on a lot of Dionysus's like his core boons, like, you know, attack, dash, call, cast, like those. Like I like a lot of his passive boons, but I don't know that I ever really got on board with a lot of the hangover stuff. And part of it could just be I don't realize how much damage it does, but to me, like just on paper, it doesn't feel like it does as much. But I've never crunched the numbers there.
I almost feel like we should just go ahead and talk about each of the, because you know, if we just talk about our favorites, like that's probably going to leave out a good 3 or 4. I am curious, like how I also think Artemis and Poseidon were some of my favorites, but I am curious about how you guys felt about Ares because he probably is my least favorite, and I can tell you why. Like to me, I think there's some like this isn't a hard and fast rule. I was trying to figure out or trying to think through why I enjoyed certain gods more than others or certain boons more than others, and I think with some of it depends on how much synergy a god requires. So with like Artemis, like, and the other thing too, like I think Artemis's bad boons are kind of locked behind getting some of her good boons first. So like one of Artemis's synergy boons is like her crits do more damage to armor, which is I usually didn't want that one because it felt very situational. But you'll never see that boon unless you already have one of her other boons first, which usually means you've got like, you know, pressure points, which is just a flat +% crit damage, or you get like one of her her regular attack or her special attack boon, or maybe like her cast boon. Like, so I feel like with certain gods like Artemis and Poseidon, you're more likely to see stuff that you want to see first. Whereas one of the things I really disliked about Ares is that like he sort of has 2 completely different builds, and they also both feel like they're not super great without synergies. So with Ares, he has like his Doom half and he has like his Blade Whirl half. And so if you try to go full Ares, there's a good chance you'll start out getting like maybe like a Doom and like his Blade Dash, and then suddenly you'll find all synergy pieces for like the one that you're not really invested in as you find more Ares boons. So it becomes this it can still work out. Like, I think I had one build where I got Artemis Ares special, which is like hunting blades where the blades will track the enemies. And then I got like a couple of Ares synergy boons where like his blades dealt more damage or lasted longer or whatever. And, you know, that was an awesome build, but it felt like with Ares, like it was kind of tough for that to come together.
Yeah, I do agree. I think Ares is probably my least favorite. And for some of the reasons you talked about, and also I just don't like the blade rifts that much. They never feel great to me.
Yeah.
I do also. Yeah, go ahead, Garrison.
I like the blade rifts, but I also I pretty much never go out of my way for an Ares option. Like if I get the blade rifts, like I can make them work, but they're not something I'd ever like set out trying to get or trying to do a build around.
Yeah. There was a time when I really liked Doom during early access. I don't know if balance changes happened around Doom that made me not feel like it does as well anymore in the full game, but I feel like it's really hard to make Doom like really critical, like super important part of your build without either his legendary or a duo boon to help it out. Putting Doom on your attack just doesn't feel that great by itself without some of that really high level stuff.
Yeah, I felt like Doom, there were some weapons, like, if I was playing the spear or the shield, I really liked the idea, the concept of getting like Doom on the special where you could just kind of tag the enemies and then use your regular attack with some other god's boon. But it felt like it was so hard to line that up because, that means you have to get Ares and get it like specifically Doom on the thing you want. And then, like you said, I agree that without the synergies, Doom in particular felt like it scaled way down starting around Elysium. Or like you would, if you just waited and watched the Doom tags happen, and that gives the enemy a lot of time to hit you. It's like those extra seconds while the Doom is just hanging over their head and they're not taking damage, and then it just doesn't hit them that hard if you don't have it really souped up.
Yeah. The one edge case that is really fun is the Ares Aphrodite duo boon, where he put Doom and Weak on somebody at the same time. Doom just keeps proccing over and over and over as long as you keep Weak on them. And it's so funny.
I get that every now and then because I tend to grab Aphrodite a lot. So then on the runs where I happen to pick up some Doom effects or they kind of force me into it, and I get that duo boon. It's like, all right, this is all right.
Yeah, it's really funny and really cool. But yeah, that's like the one case in which I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I have Doom.
When I first started playing the game, and maybe this alludes to what Nate was saying about early access, I don't know if something changed or not. When I first started, or could it just be me not really, recognizing damage values early accurately or whatever, but when I first started playing, I was like, oh, Doom is broken. Like, this is just so much damage. But yeah, I think as I've started playing more, I've really cooled on that. And I think the delayed damage is not as useful as just dealing the damage when you actually hit them. Also, and this could just be me, like between Hangover and Doom, like the kind of more delayed effects, and also to a lesser degree, Zeus's, like all of them, but those three do like a just straight percentage buff to your damage. So it's like very clear how it's affecting it. But those three, and especially Hangover and Doom, which are more delayed damage, like I have a hard time, I think, wrapping my head around, like, I don't know how effective this is actually being. So it's like purely anecdotal, and like Doom seems good, especially if you get a high level boon and get some things to help it. But like just the basic, it doesn't seem quite as powerful to me, at least after 1.0. So I've definitely really shied away from Ares stuff. I've stumbled into a couple really good Blade Rift builds where I get a lot of boons to help it, but like Ryan was saying, like if you kind of don't get those helper boons, it doesn't seem that great.
I would be very curious. Like, I'm sure someone's crunched the numbers, but like in terms of raw DPS, like where does something like Doom fall? Like, is it actually pretty good in terms of output, or is it really just not much at all?
Yeah, I would love to know that too, because I've definitely not crunched the numbers.
Yeah, I haven't done the numbers, but it does seem to me like starting in Elysium, like it can take like 2 or 3 Doom procs. If you're not doing, obviously you're probably doing something else, but sometimes, you get those builds where it's just like you've been taking more like setup or support stuff, and Doom is kind of like your only offensive thing, and like, yeah, you get to Elysium and like you start having to tag enemies like 3 times or whatever to finish them off, and it definitely feels a lot weaker. Part of it, I think, is because, yeah, one of the things I liked about Hangover is that it kind of encourages you to keep stacking it. So, and it does seem powerful when you keep up a full stack of 5 or whatever. So, like, it sort of encourages you to keep tagging the enemy, and sometimes that can lead to gameplay where you're like, oh, I don't want to let this stack fall off, so I'm gonna like dodge around and make sure I hook this enemy or shoot it with a bullet or whatever to make sure its hangover stays stacked up. But yeah, Doom actually kind of, I think, in most cases, I think there might be one of the synergy buffs that rewards you for stacking multiple Dooms, but just Doom by itself, like you hit the enemy and then there's no real way to increase that effect. And so there's really no incentive to keep hitting the enemy other than just getting your weapons like probably very weak base damage.
Yeah, and a lot of the other ones like Artemis, Poseidon, and I think Aphrodite have just like they just deal damage. Like it's just very clear that they just have a high damage output. Artemis in particular is just like, no, we're just gonna kill shit. Like I feel like all of her boons are just like, no, we're just gonna murder it.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about Artemis is that I'm not 100% sure how strong her like attack and specials are, because it's hard to know how much the crit does. Because her base damage tends to be pretty low. So she gives you like the 15 to 20% crit. But one of the things I really like about Artemis is, her call and her cast are really good.
Yes.
But she also has pressure points and the support fire, I think, the seeking arrow thing. So even if you're focusing on another god, like let's say you've got a really good Poseidon build or Zeus build or whatever, you can grab Artemis and there's a chance you'll just get like pressure points and just get a flat 3% crit.
Yep.
And I mean, Ares has the urge to kill, which is sort of similar, but I feel like pressure points and support fire I feel like pressure points affects a lot more damage types. So like it just synergizes with so many other builds that like hit for direct damage. Sometimes that was a sweet spot to have just a really good build. And then like, especially with a fast attacking weapon like the fists or like maybe like the gun, and then you just get like a couple of Artemis and you hit like pressure points and support fire, and like it's just sort of like free rolling extra damage onto an already strong build.
Yeah, I mean her dash is maybe the one boon I don't really care for a lot, but like pretty much all of her other boons is like, yeah, I'll just take this. Doesn't matter what my build is even going for. It's like I'll take whatever her boon is. It's going to be good.
I think one we haven't talked about who is definitely not like that is Zeus.
Yeah, Zeus is I think one of my least favorites.
I started to warm up on him, but man, like you can definitely get in a position where I feel like if you don't get any of his synergy boons, and in particular, I think static discharge, the one that jolts them, like his base boons or the chain lightning stuff just doesn't do a lot of damage. In theory, it can hit a lot of enemies, and it, when you get the synergy on it, it is actually pretty good. But like, yeah, if you just get chain lightning and you don't get anything else, like you end up feeling pretty weak.
Zeus is pretty fun and satisfying if you just go all in and get all the Zeus stuff. But other than that, yeah, I agree. He's not great.
If you get forced into a couple of Zeus boons, you really want to try and commit to make it work.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it does lead into something I was wondering for all of you. Did you have a preference between like going all in on one or two gods every run? Like, did you really like focusing like, getting a lot from a smaller set of gods, or did you try and spread out? Like I pretty much always do the spread out thing. There's one of the mirror upgrades that you get a damage increase for every different god you have a boon from. So I think I pretty much always get at least one boon from 5 or maybe even 6 different gods. So I definitely do the spread out, which probably influences, like, as we've been talking, like some gods maybe favor more synergy. So that probably leads to me, like, I pretty much always get like an Athena boon, usually the dash, an Artemis if I can, an Aphrodite if I can, a Poseidon if I can, like a Hermes if I can. Like, I'm like, I tend to find myself getting, most of those, sometimes one of those won't appear on a run and I might end up with a Zeus or a Ares or something instead. But I definitely spread out, and I'm curious for you all, like, do you intentionally spread out or intentionally try and go all in on one or maybe two, or do you even not really plan it that way? What do you think, Nate? What do you do?
I think I generally have two modes. One is the one where I get, the boons I'm looking for from a couple of different gods, like what you're saying. Like I'll get some Hermes and Artemis and Athena, and then pick up whatever else I get along the way. But I do really enjoy picking like two gods. I think two is like a strong number, and just like I want to get as many of these two gods' boons as I can by using their keepsakes to force this and stuff like that. That can be really fun. Really like playing with the gloves and just getting Dionysus and Demeter via their boons as I can, and just chilling and poisoning enemies all to pieces.
That's good. I really like, by the way.
Yeah, Demeter's chill effect is really good.
We haven't really talked about her. Her cast that turns it into a little crystal laser?
Well, actually, it is good if you get the synergy piece. That's a fortunate thing, because I have definitely had runs where I got the crystal beam thing, like it was the purple, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot, and like get I don't know if it's called winter or what, but it has a boon where it makes the crystals last like several seconds longer, and they chill the enemies. So when that happens, then, because if those things really need to chill, they do decent damage, but they really need to chill the enemies so they can keep the beam on the enemies, and that's when her cast becomes good. Get that effect.
I feel like that's one of the maybe even only like of the core boons, like attack, special, dash, whatever, that I just feel like I never want, because I feel like every time I use it, I put it in the arena and it's just like the enemy's moving and the beam is trying to chase it and just never quite gets there. I'm like, this thing doesn't do squat.
Yeah, that one was funny. I've definitely had some builds where I tried to lean into that, and if you don't get the pieces to support it, it can be a disaster. Like,
yeah.
That's one of those things you can definitely swing and miss on.
You can sometimes manipulate the arena to like I'll usually try to like dash around and place them like around the perimeter, and then go stand in the middle and try to get the enemies to come in, and where they're all. But by the time you do all that, like, you're gonna run out. And
what if you had a cast that just hit them?
Yeah, that's better.
Like, I feel like I would take any other cast first before doing all that work.
But her chill effects are very good, and I like her call and dash pretty well. And I think she has some other just like decent buffs to like healing and damage reduction and stuff that I just like in general.
She can buff your boon rarity, I think.
Yeah, she has a really interesting one that knocks your rarity to common, and then every so many battles they go up. So like, I feel like if you get that early, it can be really powerful.
You want to get like a couple boons you really like, and then get that, so that it'll knock those down and start upgrading them. But yeah.
What about you, Garrison? Do you have kind of a general boon strategy, or do you just kind of go with the flow?
I very much go by the seat of my pants. I would say, like, if I start a run and get a boon that I really like early on, usually I'll keep chasing that god's boons, or at least try to find things that I know work really well. Otherwise, I sit there and stare at like my options, the doors, for like 2 minutes at a time. Be like, oh, do I want Poseidon? Do I want a centaur heart? I don't know. And then get decision paralysis.
Yeah. Speaking of centaur heart, slight pivot here, like we probably talk about the gods boons enough, but like all of the other things, like the centaur hearts, the nectar, I don't know what else. Well,
there's resources, They're used for the meta progression, like the nectar and darkness and gems and keys, right?
Yeah, I guess the heart and the
There's
coin
hearts and money and palms are actually useful within the run. And of those, palms are the worst and money is the best in my opinion.
Palms are good.
I don't really like palms very much.
Well, palms have pretty heavy diminishing returns for most boons. You want like 1 to 2 palms, I think, for your best like attack or cast or whatever, because that gives you a pretty big buff. But then after that, like your palms all kind of go, they just drop off. Unless, except for something like pressure points, which I think pretty much is just 1 to 1. I think most boons, like, so if you get your Aphrodite attack that gives you plus 120% special damage or whatever, your first palm will get you like another plus 60, and then your next one will get you like plus 40, and then your third one will get you like plus 15, and it just goes way down from there.
I mean, they're definitely diminishing returns, but the first like 2 are huge. And like, if you want, 2 levels on, your 3 or 4 most important boons, like, I think it's worth getting those, and like, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of prioritization to get them.
So I do want to briefly mention before we talk about the door rewards real quick, but I think one thing we didn't talk about a lot with the gods that's worth just kind of throwing out there is the duo boons. And of course they have legendary boons, so if you get lucky you might get the gods usually have some extremely rare boon that tends to be a very powerful synergy boon or something. But it's also kind of neat to see like the duo boons where if you have a certain Dionysus boon and you get like a Poseidon boon, you might get exclusive access, and suddenly like all of the boons you pick up for the rest of the run are purple or better. And some of those actually kind of would play into the builds or the way that the different gods' powers would interact. So just kind of throw that out there. But circling back to door rewards, I kind of so one way to look at this is basically you have I think whenever you get a choice of doors, you have
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We had some technical difficulties, took a break, but we are going to continue this Hades episode of the ATACS podcast. When we left off, we were talking about all sorts of door rewards and progression rewards and mechanics stuff, and we could keep talking about all that stuff all day. We could talk about keepsakes. We could talk about the pact of punishment and heat levels. And this game's got a whole lot to it. But executive decision. We're gonna use our last little bit of time here to kind of talk about the narrative, the more narrative side of this game, because this game's got a lot of writing, as we alluded to earlier, and it's got a lot of fun characters. And I think Supergiant in general has done like really good narrative work in their games. And I think one thing that stands out to me about their games, and I think is probably more true in Hades than their other games, is like narrative is so core to everything. Like it's hard to really separate. They kind of just it's such a crucial part of the game experience, that like interacting with these characters and all the little story beats you follow. And we mentioned earlier that part of the joy of starting a new run is like going back to the house and seeing what everyone has to say and all that stuff. I'm gonna kind of two comments I have about the narrative, and we'll kind of pass it to someone else, but other than just, I think generally this game has fantastic writing and fantastic voice acting, and like just nails all of that stuff and has interesting things to say. But one, I really just love the Zagreus's rebellious teen shtick, and just the back and forth between him and Hades. It just cracks me up every time.
It's very good. Hades is such a shitty dad.
And Zagreus is such a teen, and
Yeah.
yeah, whatever, Dad, I'm busting out of here. But also, this is a Supergiant, a touch Supergiant. The other thing I wanted to touch on is this is something they kind of do in all their games, and it's like Supergiant does a really good job at acknowledging what the player is doing in its writing, and like embedding the game mechanics in like a smart way into the narrative. Like, you know, it's not just a skill tree. Like, you're interacting with this fated mirror that has, you know, lore that provides you your upgrades. Like the Pact of Punishment is something Hades or whoever set up that like has a, you know, there's a lore reason for everything, and it's and characters will comment on it too. It's like characters comment on what weapon you're using. They comment on the keepsake or the mirror upgrades or the pact. Like, characters comment on what you, the player, are mechanically doing, which is, I think, a very Supergiant touch. And like, they somehow do it in a way that doesn't feel fourth wall breaking, but it's like, and I think that speaks to the holistic game design they have of like everything fits together. The narrative and the mechanics are, you know, just so intertwined. And that's something I've always really liked about their games, and I think they do it incredibly well here. And it's it's super charming, and it works.
Fated List of Minor Prophecies is one of my favorite little dumb things that they do to just like give flavor to a very video gamey thing. It's just a list of like really minor side quests or like challenges to pursue. But no, this is a list of minor prophecies made by the fates, and they are all worded as like, Zagreus will, you know, destroy this many enemies in this specific way or something like that. It all ties it back into the Greek mythology stuff, but it is just like a super video gamey thing.
Yeah, it sounds dumb on paper, but they pull it off so well that it I don't know, it just works. But yeah, so Nate, any other like characters or story items or whatever you wanna shout out? We'll kind of go around the horn if everyone wants to shout out one or two things or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one for me is just how they fit the narrative onto the roguelike structure, where the repetition is key to progressing relationships with all these characters, because you're just meeting them over and over and talking about what's happened and seeing them after you die, and then they comment on that, and then or you make it to a new area and they'll comment on that, and you have a conversation, and then you're like, you know, finding resources and giving it to them to increase your relationship with them. So all that stuff works really well. And then just also how they structure the ending for it as a roguelike, where, you know, you don't just beat the game once, the final boss once, and then get credits. You have to keep doing it, and you get these little those little scenes at the end with Persephone and talking to her, and then they throw you back to the beginning and say you got to do it again to just have like a couple more moments with this very important character. It's like a really cool way to do it.
Yeah, I want to touch on that first point a little more, because it's, and kind of the second point as well, is because it's such, I think this is one of the biggest reasons this game has caught on as well as it has, is like a lot of roguelikes are kind of dry on this front. Like it's like you go through the run, you die or maybe win, and you know, it just dumps you back to the start, and it's just very cold and indifferent about that experience. And Hades, they go to such great lengths to make the story a part of the repetitive nature of it as a roguelike. Like, the story acknowledges that you're going on runs over and over. They comment on that, like, storylines progress regardless of whether you won or lost the run. Like, it makes the House of Hades feel like a permanent place where things are happening, rather than just, oh, let's hit a reset button. Like, it's a more living, breathing world. And it was some Q&A or AMA or whatever with Supergiant, and they were like, yeah, I feel like a lot of our games sometimes just boil down to took this genre but add story. Like, you can kind of repeat that of like, oh, we made a roguelike but added story. But I think that's so critical to what they've done with this game, and a huge part of what makes it successful is they've found a way to leverage the roguelike structure to enhance the story. Like, I think like their story is better for embracing the roguelike structure than if they had like tried to make it separated somehow. Like, it's just really smart. Anyway, there's my ramble. Ryan, what kind of highlights do you have around the characters or anything?
I don't know, man. Theseus broke my heart, so I don't know if I can really get behind the character writing in Hades. I'm just joking.
Bag down.
Yep.
I will say, I mean, I think, some of the better roguelikes tend to have, I guess they tend to be a little bit more about like environmental storytelling. But yeah. I do agree that, roguelikes sometimes just don't really pay much attention to story at all. I think one thing just to add on to what you guys were saying is, obviously I like a lot of the characters. We haven't talked about like much about Nyx or like, Cerberus, maybe Hades or Skelly or Dusa or Meg, but
they're all such amazing characters too.
Yeah, a lot of them are really interesting, and they paint some history. Like, I didn't realize it actually took me a while to advance my relationship to Meg, even to like, I don't think I ever gave her ambrosia, or maybe I just gave her the first bottle. But part of that was because she has such bad blood towards Zagreus, and I guess maybe they have some, like, they dated or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
There's definitely, but not just between the characters and Zagreus, the character you're playing, but also the characters and each other. Mm-hmm. So one thing I liked that they did is, for example, Nyx is sort of like the matron of the house, and she's sort of like a surrogate mother to Zagreus. And, of course, their conversations reflect that. But then, when Zagreus starts befriending Dusa, who's sort of like the Gorgon head servant, even just at the friendship level, Nyx is very like hostile, or hostile might be a strong word, but she's sort of antagonistic to that relationship. And that's such it's cool to see some of the inner character relationships, and sometimes they're funny, or sometimes they tell little stories, but that actually, I thought that was a really cool moment, because that is such a Nyx is, even though she's not Zagreus's biological mother, she is sort of that stern is not the right word, but she's what's the right word?
She's got to keep the house in order.
Yeah, she's sort of like the matron, and she doesn't like to see Zagreus, I guess, dating down or whatever. And so she's kind of like pretty direct and like in opposing that friendship, which I thought that was just a neat little twist, a neat little storytelling twist. And, obviously they have a ton of little stories like that. And you have inner character relationships like I thought there was some really funny dialogue between like Hypnos and Meg, for example. So it's just one little thing I wanted to add on, as well as lamenting, Deuce's rejection of Zagreus.
Oh, Deuce is so good. Garrison, what characters or moments or anything stuck out to you?
I mean, we gotta talk about the minotaur in the room, right?
I was hoping someone would bring up this beefy.
Of course, I'd have to talk about Theseus because he's fantastic. Like,
he's the best there is.
I love his dialogue too. It's just the way he taunts Zagreus and everything. So good.
There's so many good moments. I think whenever you first put on the pact,
yes,
that gives Theseus like the chariot. It's funny, like Zagreus walks in and he just says, "This must be some sort of bad dream."
It's so funny. If you never, Garrison, I don't think you've done much with the packs. If you never do this, at least go look up what the extreme measures pack does to this pack changes all the boss fights.
Yeah.
And what it does to Theseus is quite special. And his dialogue is so great.
I'm aware of it, and I've done 2 levels of extreme measures, but I have not punished myself enough for 3. But I think too, like, it's not just that Theseus is so great, but I think I'm close to like 40 runs in the game, and like I'm still getting new dialogue, and it's just golden every single time. And, like now it's the point where it's like clearly not their like first tier like best dialogue for Theseus, but there's still some really good lines in there.
Have you seen or have you encountered the dialogue where Theseus argues with Asterius?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, that's some of my favorite dialogue between or with Theseus is where he gets mad at Asterius and he blames it on Zagreus.
I feel like we could spend another 2 hours just gushing about the characters and the dialogue, because all of it's like it's easy to just say, but like it's so true, just like how good all of it is. You got any other shout outs, Garrison? I'm glad you called out our beefy duo, because Theseus and Darius are amazing. And I hate them at the same time.
So as a Greek mythology buff, I always really liked the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and I have not completed like their whole thing yet, which I feel like that might be the thing that I'm most interested to see how all that resolves in successive runs. But yeah, I do like them, and of course their singing is pretty great. So the music, of course, in Hades is also wonderful, which is another thing that we could spend plenty of time talking about, I'm sure. But shout out to that as well.
The soundtrack is incredible, and I love this. Is kind of ties back into something I said earlier. Like they have a reason for everything. Like all of the lyrical songs in this game are someone in the world singing. Like it's not just background noise. Like they made that a part of the game. There are musicians in the game, and it's just a great touch.
Oh, and also the song of Zagreus being the reincarnation of Dionysus, whatever. Sing of Zagreus, O Muse, Slayer of Titans, first of his name.
Oh,
do you remember that? Or
where does that come in?
Zagreus tells Orpheus that he's actually like he's Dionysus.
Oh yeah, he starts messing with Orpheus a little bit.
And so then Orpheus starts singing a song about Zagreus being like the god of wine. And then Hades, like, if you talk to Hades, he's like, "What's the matter, boy? You look disturbed. You don't like the song? It's about you."
Oh man.
They just play like it's so funny, like, because then Hades is ribbing Zagreus about this song that Orpheus starts singing all the time. And I mean, like Orpheus in my game, like you said, Flex, I've probably done 80 or 90 runs, and every few runs he'll be singing. He'll be there singing the Zagreus God of Wine song.
Oh, so good. Dionysus himself is also a hilarious character. He's just he's your drunk bro. He's just like, hey, what's up, Zag man? How's it going?
I never guessed your mom was into all that underworld stuff.
Yeah, we could go on and on, but yeah, in all the stories are just so good, and it really enhanced. Like I think if this game didn't have the level of storytelling and dialogue and characters that it does, it would not resonate so well, nearly as well. And as Garrison said, the music's incredible. All the art and animation is incredible. Like, I mean, even just like the little flourishes that happen when like you access the mirror or like the boon choices are coming up. Like just every little detail in this game is just so well considered. And I'm going to use this to transition into final thoughts is like, I think Supergiant as a studio, one thing I've really liked about them is that I feel like they just pay attention to every little detail. Like nothing's there just because for, oh, it's a video game. Of course it has this. Like everything feels like they really thought about it and like it has its place, and they've paid so close attention to detail, and just it all fits together just really well. And that's something I like about them as a studio. And I think in Hades, they've just nailed all of that. Like everything just is superb. Like the action feels great. The story touches feel great. The way it ties together, the lore, the music, all of the stuff we were saying at the beginning of the podcast. Like I'm not a huge roguelike person, but like I'm just completely smitten with this game. Like the way they've balanced everything and the progression and like the way the choices feel as you go through a run and construct your build, like all of that just feels so immaculately done. Like it's really a special game, and just run after run, advancing the story, experimenting with new builds. Like it's, in my opinion, by pretty clearly their best game. It's definitely the one I enjoy the most. And just a game I've thoroughly enjoyed for over 100 hours, and will probably do more runs of at some point. That was a very broad overview, but I mean, it's what about you, Nate? Any final parting thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
No, I think I probably echo most of what you just said. I think it all comes together super well, and it is both just fun to play, but also fun to engage with in every other way, with story and art and music. So it's pretty impressive.
What about you, Ryan? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess you covered a lot of things they did well, and I guess a couple of the things we talked about earlier that stick out to me. Just, I like the genre of roguelikes, and to a lesser extent roguelites, and I like the way that they've, maybe I don't know what the right word. I mean, I don't know if they've revolutionized the genre per se, but at the same time, like we talked about, they've done some smart things with making like character dialogue part of the progression, giving the player a lot of control over like the challenge level, and encouraging, putting the bounties out for heat levels and stuff like that. I think they've done some really cool things with the genre. And then, as you said, just Supergiant, and they make really well polished games. Like their action is usually really good, and their writing is really good. It would be tough, like for me, to pick between Hades and Pyre, because I really like the story and the writing in Pyre a lot. But Hades is also, I think, just has way better gameplay in a sense. And another thing, they focused on character dialogue, which I think was a really smart story structure decision. So yeah, they've done some cool things.
I feel like Pyre is where they leveraged, like when I said at some point, I feel like they took lessons from all their previous games and pulled it together in Hades. I think Pyre was a very character driven story game, and you can see that
Yeah, for sure.
As you mentioned, Hades is also very character driven. What about you, Garrison?
Yeah, I'd say at its heart, it just, beyond all the polish, it just has a really addicting gameplay loop. And whether a run goes really well or goes really poorly, I would always emerge from that little pool back into Hades and be like, well, I have time for one more run, and just like want to keep going. So I think it's fun, and it gives you the tools, I think, to find the challenge level that's appropriate for you. And I think it does a really good job about giving you those options and just like, there's God mode if you need it, and it does never like draw attention to that. And I think it's great for games to have accessibility options like that. So that's pretty cool. I'm curious if it's going to top Game of the Year list, or if other things might beat it out.
I think I guess I'll just say it's thus far my favorite game of the year, and I think all of us clearly like it a lot. It's a very good video game, and I think we've all enjoyed playing it. I've enjoyed talking about it with you all, and I think that's gonna wrap up our big Hades deep dive discussion, spoiler cast, whatever you want to call it. This has been ATACS. I'm Flex, joined by Nate, Ryan, and Garrison, and we are going to call this a show. Thank you for listening, and join us next time on ATACS. See ya.